They say that no good deed goes unpunished, and it's a curse to live in interesting times. Welcome to life as a professional software developer. 18 months ago, I thought that context receivers were going to be a useful addition to the Kotlin language. So I published a series of episodes where I used them in the Gilded Rose stock control system. Firstly, just as a marker to show where code performs I/O, and then as a way to pass around an active database transaction. Since then, work on context receivers has stalled. To be fair, they always were experimental, but the result of that experiment is they're being killed off in favour of context parameters, which are more explicit and less elegant. Even more annoying is there's no migration path. In fact, context receivers will be removed from the compiler before context parameters are introduced. So if our codebase is not to skip at least one compiler version, we're going to have to refactor to replace all our uses of context receivers, and then wait, and then refactor to use context parameters where we had been using context receivers.
We're in one of those places where we appear to be up to our asses in alligators and trying to remember that we're sent to drain the swamp. Now context receivers are becoming context parameters, which I'm really not sure about personally. The upshot is that having upgraded the Kotlin compiler, now everywhere I have a context receiver in the Gilded Rose codebase, I'm getting warnings, which is annoying. Here's a place in the code that has context receivers. You can see here this save function says that I need a context of IO and a context of dbtx context in order to run. And I don't know what's going on with IntelliJ. It just seems to be dying all the time at the moment. This is the error. It's happening again and again. Don't know what it is. I enabled K2 mode. Is that the issue? Error whilst resolving something for simple function import. I don't know. I'm going to report them. I'm going to reboot IntelliJ and let's see how we do. 3, 2, 1, you're back in the room, and I see now that we have actually got these little squiggly things that are annoying me. Experimental context receivers are deprecated and will be superseded by context parameters. Please don't use context receivers. Well, that serves me right for living on the bleeding edge and trying things out. So it looks like we're going to have to remove our use of context receivers altogether. As I was trying to explain before things crashed, we actually are using two types here. One is for a transaction, and that's to say that database code needs to be running inside a transaction which is stored inside this object somewhere. And the other is this IO context here, which is simply an object, and I was using to mark code that requires IO and is therefore an action rather than a calculation. In places like our items repositories, I think we could argue that the existence of a transaction implies that we're doing IO. But there are a couple of other places where I'm using this. One is the version of the items that saves to a stock file. There's another story there, and that's another bit of tidying we need to do. And the other is the pricing. So when we go off to the pricing service, we run in the context of IO to remind us that these things might fail and give different answers at different times, those sort of things. So, of the two types of context receivers, the IO one isn't really needed, to be honest with you. It was just an experiment in seeing whether it made the code more expressive, whereas the transaction is actually useful, maybe even required. So if we're going to remove those context receivers, we're going to have to find an actual migration strategy. But I think we might just be able to stop using IO and do half the job with no real consequences. So let's see how much trouble we're in by finding references to this IO object. Here we go, here we go, here we go. Oh my goodness, a lot of them. And these will be divided into the places right down the bottom where we're actually doing IO. And then all the functions between the entry point and that very, very low level where we take this IO object and pass it down to prove that we know that we're doing IO. Effectively, context IO is just a marker to remind us about functionality that's an action. So we need a strategy for removing this context IO. Now we might just try a complete search and replace of context IO with nothing, but we'd have to finesse these ones here where we're doing context of fixture and IO or context of IO and no transaction and so on and so on. So I think if we do that, we're going to be fixing things for a long time. The same will be true if we start removing context IO from the entry points. It's effectively a parameter that won't be available to all of the functions all the way down. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to find the bottom level of context IO, remove it from there, and then it will be unused in the layers up and we can gradually get rid of it. So what is that bottom layer? Well, looking through here, more usages, la 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 la. It's interesting it's used in persistence tests. I think maybe we could drill through there. And you see we have this stock list save to, and this stock list save to takes context of IO, requires context of IO. So whatever was calling this must have been providing that context of IO. And in fact, I think we just saw that here, didn't we? Where this test has a context of IO that's automatically passed down to this save to. But this can supply it even if this doesn't need it. So I think we might get away with just deleting that from there. And while we're here, we'll do this one, load items, that's the same thing, and just see whether that still builds. Well, that has built, so let's run all the tests. Okay, 2 uses of context IO down. We might then, I think, go up one and say who calls this. So, persistent test save and load file. Let's have a look. This extends with an IO resolver in order that this test one can have a context of IO. I think now that that will compile if I just get rid of that. Any other places in here we took context of IO? No, and the reason is because in other places we've really just been looking at the lines rather than actually saving them. Okay, so I think probably we can say I don't need this IO resolver either and run again. Baby steps. And now stock file item save. This is a place where we have stock file items, and this function here, save, needs a context of IO. It needs it in order to stock list save to the temp file and the version file. I think that just means that we could get rid of this. It would be nice if IntelliJ could tell us about unused context receivers, but as I suppose context receivers aren't a thing anymore, and neither, it turns out, are context parameters, that's just not going to happen for a bit. So let's delete that one. But, oh dear, that doesn't compile, and it doesn't compile because this is overriding a method that exists in our interface of items. Okay, now we have the problem that we have to fix stock file items, but in order to fix stock file items we have to fix the parent, but that means we'll have to fix all the other children. I think I could easily mess that up, so I'm just going to undo this, get us back into the place where we are running, and I'm going to commit, and I'm just going to keep on amend committing, so we sort of ratchet along a system that's working, compiling, but if I mess it up I can just revert to the last of the amend commits. This is going to be removing context IO. So we'll commit that but not push it. Okay, now we go to items, and here we have in items the fact that items save and load both say they require context IO to say that they are doing IO. It would be nice if we could refactor that and change its signature and remove the context of IO, and it would fix all the implementations. But again, IntelliJ never really supported context receivers, so I suppose we're going to have to do this the old-fashioned way. Now, I don't think there's any economic way of doing this except chasing the compile errors. So I'm just going to remove that from there, and we might as well do both. Now we'll find out where there are errors. So DB items can't need the IO. But it seems that the things that this was calling didn't require the IO, so that's all right. Now our dual items, that's another thing we have to get rid of at some point, but we can just fix these 2 places, I hope. Build. Stock file items, well, that's where we came in, so we know that it's safe to do that, and that, I hope. And dual items tests creates its own version of DB items. I guess that means I can just get rid of that. And it does it again. F2 to see whether there are any other issues. Yes, there are. F2. Don't know what that is. Oh, well, it's just a warning. Maybe it'll compile this time. In memory items. Another implementation of items I'd forgotten about. This is used in testing, so again we can fix those up to match the definition in items. Splendid. Does that run the tests? Oh no, that actually is genuinely surprised me. Let's have a look. Okay, so we're getting an abstract method error, and if we get anything like this we know that the compiler is basically broken, or at least the build is broken because something happened at runtime that shouldn't have been able to happen. Some call to something hasn't been updated with a change to that thing. I'm going to go to build, rebuild project and see whether that sorts us out. Run again. Sigh, no it doesn't. Check that's the same test. It is. In these situations, the easiest thing to do is often just to delete the build directory and try again. Aha, and here we see that in list stock test we are now telling us that we have an error that I missed. Now that one, they seem to be okay. Let's see whether that's good. And it is. Phew. So we'll commit that as an amend. So I could have separate commits and squash them all at some point, but if I'm reasonably confident that I won't need to undo a thing, amend commits works well. And if the worst comes to worst, we have local history to dig us out of this hole. So amend commit that. 32 warnings now. Let's just see we're not meeting trouble halfway. Ah, yes, these are all issues with the context receivers. That is the reason we are doing this job in the first place. So let's just remind ourselves what we were doing. We started at the bottom level of where we were using this IO context, and we removed one of them, which was the one that was storing on disk, a tab separated file. The other actual low level place we're doing this, I think, is in the pricing service. Can't remember what that's called, so let's have a look. Something like priced item, priced stock list loader. That would be a place to start. Now this brings together the result of two things. One is the loading and one is the pricing. The loading has this IO context, but we now think it doesn't need it because we removed it from our loading. But the pricing here we haven't fixed. So let's have a look, see where this is created. It's created in our app with a pricing. Where is pricing? We'll be calling this constructor, and the pricing we're using here is the value_elf client. So let's go and find you. So value_elf are our external pricing supplier, and we express the functionality they give us as something that takes an item and returns a price for that item. So this is a function, and that price is nullable because they may not be able to tell us the price. That function type, though, has been decorated with this context of IO to remind us that it's an action, that it goes off across the network. So this is the equivalent of the methods on the item interface that we had before. It's sort of our lowest level, but I think we might, in fact, just say value_elf client returns something that is just a function of item to price. Doesn't need IO because that's the thing we're removing, and that therefore we could remove it from here as well, and that might compile. Let's have a go. Okay, so that doesn't compile because app says my pricing needs to be a function that needs context of IO, whereas value_elf client is returning a function that doesn't require context of IO. In terms of the type system, I think that's a bit strange. It feels like we're saying, I could give you this, but you're not asking for it, and therefore I can't call you. Don't know. I'm just going to see how many places I have to delete in order to get us working. So the price stock list loader, it turns out, is another. Price stock list loader, that's the place where we're mixing loading and pricing, and maybe we can just get rid of that. And then, well, I'm sort of just extemporizing now. And here we have it priced by retry pricing, doc list. Oh, there we go. There's another one. It would be nice if there was a way to do this, but I don't know what it is. These function definitions, I just need to delete until something works. Okay, this is a place where we are conjuring an IO out of nowhere in order to allow us to call this price. It's basically marshalling this into here. That was something that was going to go away when context receivers were fixed, but they're not going to be fixed. But I just don't think we need it at all. Let's find out by trying to build. Okay, now what do we have? Fixture pricing. Let's go and have a look in our fixture. Has that got the same issue? Pricing here. Well, that is a function that requires context IO apparently, but now I don't think does. I feel like I'm digging a deeper and deeper hole, but that's another magic IO that can go. So I liken this sort of processing computing as walking down a corridor where at the end of the corridor there's a door that you can't see through, and you open that door and you've either finished or you're just in another corridor with another door at the end. You've no idea how many doors you have to walk down. We're just going to carry on until we find fresh air and hope that when we do, that we have a working system. Ooh. Hooray! Right, commit that as an amend. So now we're in one of those places where we appear to be up to our asses in alligators and trying to remember that we're sent to drain the swamp. The last alligator we batted off was this value_elf client. We think that was the bottom level of context IO. And then we had the price stock list loader. Here it is. And I think our aim was to get rid of the context IO from there. Looking at this, I think that because this pricing now doesn't require context IO, this doesn't require context IO there. But we would have another magic there to get rid of. This it priced by, that's a place that we haven't removed context IO from there. And that uses item priced by, which is a place we haven't got rid of item context IO here. But as these are private functions, we know we're not storing up trouble. Some issue here. Loading. Okay, so loading is a function that needs IO context, but I believe this is being satisfied by the items interface that now no longer needs it. So we could remove that. But it turns out we have an issue here that stock load and update stock list is context of IO. So stock is the thing that allows us to load stock and update the quality. I think that given that loading the items no longer requires context IO, this probably doesn't either. Any more things in there? No. Goodness me, that compiles and passes the test. Good. Let's bank that. Okay then, I think we are now in a position where we have updated the low-level things and some of the medium-level things. I'm going to go back to IO and see how many uses we have. And these seem to be divided into things about our app and things about our tests. Now the tests are things that we're using IO in order to call things that do IO. But I think that places like list stock test and DB items test and so on are all places that we could remove this because we have removed the context from the thing that they're testing. So let's pick the one I have to be hovering over. This is saying that in order to test our dual items, we need to take the IO context. So I think we can get rid of that and that. But it turns out that these are extending the items contract. That I guess itself is context IO. So again, we've got the problem of having to fix both at once in order to get it to compile, but I think we can get rid of that. Let's try a build. We call this leaning on the compiler. I think that built. Let's find out by running the tests. No, again, we really aren't building, are we? Let's have a look at our problems. Project errors, there are none. Build the project. There are apparently still none, but I'm guessing that if I delete the build directory and try and build again, that we will find that there are places it doesn't compile. Or maybe not. That's slightly worrying, isn't it? Run the tests. Oh dear. So in these circumstances, we have to decide whether to try and fail forwards, fixing what we've got in only 2 places, or just revert. And I think the easiest thing here is just going to be rollback to check everything is okay. Run all our tests. Okay, that's good. Let's try again. This is our items contract, which is context of IO. Let's take that away and that away. See what we need to fix. The answer appears to be nothing, but let's go and find the children. So we've got DB items tests. That we think doesn't need context of IO. Go back to items contract, find its children. Dual items tests. Again, I don't think we need context of IO or that. And that means that one there, and any others? Yes, there. Any others? Yes, there. Note that we're still having to use the transaction context here, but that's fine. Get rid of you. Get rid of you. Maybe F2 would be a better way of doing that. F2. Okay. Back to items contract. Find who we haven't fixed. In memory items tests. That's not going to require context of IO. Stock file items tests. That's not going to require context of IO. Does it build and run? Phew. Let's check that in before it changes its mind. Good. Back to IO, back to finding places where it's used. I think stock test sounds simple. I think we might be able to say get rid of that, and that, and that, and that, and that. Run. Perfect. Amend, commit. Back again. IO, IO, and off to work we go. I think here we have value of tests. That sounds like a lower level thing again. Let's have a look. Value of tests is value of contract. So let's go and fix things in there. We have a fixture resolver, whatever that is. These contexts are still going to require the fixture. I really did go all in on context, didn't I? Oh well. So now we can go back to value of tests. They are not going to need IO resolver. These are not going to need IO. And are we good? We are good. Okay, now price stock list loader tests feels like the lowest level. Go in here, and I think we're just going to go through that little dance. Run. Commit, amend, commit. Close all the windows, go back to IO, find the usages. Now then, we're really just left with things in our test tree, all these ones here, including the fixture, and the app itself. Now these tests largely use the app, so we can't remove them from the test before we remove them from the app, so I think the app is the next place. Let's have a look. So this is context of IO. Why? Well, because it was using the price loader, which is a price stock list loader where this load required context of IO, but I don't think that's required anymore. And I'm going to take a punt that none of these do, because we've worked from the low levels up to the entry point. How are we? Oh, that's good. Commit that. And now I think we're just going to have tests to deal with. So, add item acceptance contract. From memory, and it was quite a while ago, most of these tests use this fixture class here. And this fixture requires context of IO in order to do things around the stock list and so on. Those low-level things, I think, are no longer going to require IO, but the fixture is now sort of our lowest level. I think we might just be able to get rid of those. It turns out that check stock list is unused, so just get rid of it. And then this init function here, where we use run IO, that was a way of providing our IO object to a block to say, okay, I admit it, this is going to be an action. I think we just don't need that anymore. Hooray! So I hope we're just into the mopping up side now. Maybe this will go into fast forwards. Okay, at this point we have very, very few references left. We have populate main, which is my way of populating test data. And you see this is a point at which we supply the IO context at the top level. So we should just be able to take that block there and remove that and that, reformat. We're not actually running this through the test, but I'm quietly confident. Then finally, what are we left with? Resolving. So resolving says, this is our IO resolver, which I think now should be unused. Let's find out by doing safe delete. Find out where that's used. Add item no HTMX tests. Okay, so we missed that one, but I can't believe it's required. Delete it, run everything. It's all good. That is now not required, so I have to delete it. It's gone. And now everything is in this file, and I think we should be able to go back to the project view and delete that file. Is everything good? Ah, well, no, it turns out not. So either I wasn't listening or something was lying to me. Let's see where we use run IO in here. Ah, so it's our handlers. When they need to do something with IO, they need this run IO function. We know that that's no longer the case, so we can get rid of that one. Interestingly, where we've used run IO to make a block out of something, we can just replace it with a run, and then inline run gives us our block body. Don't know why that's called now1. Can't remember what it was called before, but we will rename it to now. Same thing here. Make that a run, inline the run. And this time I'm actually going to undo and see what the issue was. Item IDs was that. And then if I redo, for some reason it's renamed that, changed the name of it. Who can fathom the mind of IntelliJ? Don't know how we had this laid out before, but something like that will do. How are we doing? A return expression. Okay, I thought the inlining would do the job for us, but maybe not. Here we have another run IO that I can't believe we need. All of those tests pass, and do our browser test pass. They do. Marvelous. So let's go back to commit. We want to amend commit all those little things. And if we look at all the things we've changed, it's an awful lot of this project. How confident are we that we haven't broken anything? Well, we have a lot of tests. They've run both at the browser and the HTTP and the model level. It's possible I left behind some unused imports or bad formatting, that sort of thing. In some projects, they'd be picked up by a pull request or wouldn't be picked up by a pull request. But in this case, I think providing it works, then we can find those things next time we're in a file and everything, fix them up then. So I'm going to change this message to removed context of IO. See whether we have any warnings. Let's see what we've got. And the answer is, I think, only really the context parameters that we've left behind. Redundant suppression here. I don't believe that is redundant actually. Those parameters are X lens failure. I mean, not sure I can be bothered to fix that right now. All appear to be warnings that IntelliJ has foisted on us in the last year and a half. So I'm going to ignore those and say that we're done for the day. Your mileage may vary, but in my experience, this has been a typical wide-ranging refactor. The technique of starting at the lowest level at functions is generally a good idea, although as you've seen, interfaces can complicate that, because when we change something that's defined by an interface, we have to change it and all of its implementations. There will be things that we try that turn out to be more complicated than we thought, and we back out. There will be times the build just doesn't work for some reason, and we have to delete the output directory. There will be times when IntelliJ crashes, and we have to restart that. There will be times when we can use the automated refactoring tools, and times when it's easiest just to break the compile and fix up all the errors that arise because of that. In many ways, though, this has been an easy refactor because nothing could actually really depend on that context of I/O. It didn't have any operations. That's not true of our transaction context. So next week we're going to have to work out how to change from context receivers to an actual parameter or something. I don't know what yet. If you'd like to see me working that out, then please subscribe to the channel and press that like button so that YouTube will show you more of them. If you want to be interrupted on a Friday afternoon, you could even set notifications on. And if you enjoyed this, then I think you'll also enjoy the book that I wrote with that price called Java to Kotlin and Refactoring Guidebook, details of which are in the show notes below. Thanks for watching.